What's up, y'all? Matt here at Blackstone Shooting Sports. Today we got a really special guest on the podcast. We got Eli over here from Alchemy Custom Weaponry and Cabot Gun.
Hey y'all, Eli Duckworth here with Alchemy Custom Weaponry and Cabot Guns. First of all, thank you so much, Blackstone, for having me and for also being an awesome Alchemy dealer. So, of course, I'm really honored to be, at the beginning and start of this podcast for you. So, thank you again. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for coming out. All right, so I want to know, why should everyone in the country have a 1911?
Oh, man, that's my favorite question. So the 1911, for those that don't know, we're talking single stack. I won't delegate it just to a 45, but, single stack, John Moses Browning, the short recoil, lock breech action. Why I think everyone needs one. It is America's pistol, okay? Mm-hmm. When we think about the United States on a global scene, that's the pistol that brought us there. It's the last Western handgun, okay? The 1911 cut its teeth in the punitive expedition into Mexico, which was done on horseback, okay? So when we think about that, we think this gun went from the Wild West all the way to, terrorist, obviously the global war on terror. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a huge span. Over a century of Americans carrying that gun as a fighting handgun. We're talking law enforcement, military, and civilians all alike. It is, I call it the American katana. It's the gun I think that you should pass down to the next generation. Mm-hmm. When we think about the United States, we think, listen, our country doesn't predate firearms, unlike, the European powers or, those in the Far East. In Europe, suits of armor and swords are passed down to generation. In Americans, it's guns. And if there's one gun that I think should be passed down in every American household, it is the 1911. It's what defines us as a country. We've taken it to two world wars. Gangsters and lawmen alike have carried it. It is the quintessential American fighting gun. And I just think that not only that, but it's practically one of the sexiest looking guns that has ever been made. So on top of the American history and heritage, you get a lot of performance out of it, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But to me, it's just a must have for the American household.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So Emily, you're a competitive shooter, grew up shooting Glocks. What is your take on shooting 1911s versus kind of more what you're used to?
So for me, I'm more used to the Glock side of it. That's what I grew up on. It was always production class. It was always right out the box, shoot it. Right. We had other people that would compete with these. I never really got the chance to experience it as much as I probably should have or wanted to. I think I shot maybe one competition with one that I borrowed from somebody more towards the end of my competitive side of the career. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. It's a little smooth, a little different because there's different rules for different guns and different classes for USPSA. But overall, now that I'm kind of like getting into it, it's like, ooh, this is like a different ball game. It's almost like I'm not going to say I'm all the way steering towards it, but
you will be.
Yeah, I do like it.
You will be really by the end of the day.
It's definitely different than I'm used to.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna hate on it as much as I used to, because I was not a massive fan of them. But now that I'm like starting to actually get into it and shoot more of them, I'm definitely leaning towards it.
Well, and I think you come up with a pretty interesting point there too. We talked a little bit off camera. Obviously, you and I are the same age, mid-20s. And I do think a lot of younger folks especially, don't have that respect for the 1911 that other generations have had. And what I always attribute to this is there's been a little bit of an information gap that as the internet has came online, a lot of the really great 1911 information from these amazing gun writers from back in the day, and gun fighters, by the way. We're not talking about people who just went out and chronographed shit.
Stuff.
Yeah, sorry. We're not talking about people who went out and chronographed stuff. We're talking about people who actually were in gunfights. Charlie Askins comes to mind as one of those. And, we have a big disconnect between that information because a lot of it hasn't made it to the internet. So when our generation comes along, we don't typically look at gun magazines. Our generation is less likely to pick up a book like, Henry Fitzgerald's Shooting, which came out in the 30s. Okay. Really interesting book. You should totally look it up. But, so there's a little bit of information gap where now the marketing propaganda we're fed is that polymer, double stack, striker fired, mess, I'm going to call it. I'm really going to try. I was trying to be a little bit political, okay? But, I hate those guns, okay? Don't have any use for them. I'm not even going to act like I do. But there's a big disconnect there, an information gap. And so that's like one of my big, I would call it my crusade almost, is to kind of close that information gap and show you that people have been doing serious work with these guns for a century, a whole 100+ years. People have been doing serious competitive, serious gunfighting, and obviously carrying it on them every day, hunting, everything with the 1911. So it is a serious tool that I think that a lot of people don't take seriously. So I'm trying to obviously educate them on that regard. But I agree. I think a lot of people, especially our age, don't take those guns seriously.
I think a lot of what comes in here is I want something basic. I want something simple. Don't want nothing crazy. And they lean more towards the polymer side versus this. This looks intimidating to people that don't understand guns almost.
Yeah, so my thing, would be I'm going to buy my first handgun.
Sure.
Why would a 1911 make sense if I don't, know all the ins and outs of maintenance and all of those kind of things, and I'm just sort of learning how to carry a firearm, use a firearm, so on and so forth.
Well, I'm going to give you something you probably didn't expect to hear, and it don't make sense.
Okay.
Now, I started on 1911, but, John Moses Browning handpicked me to be his prophet, so it's a little different. When it comes to people going in and going after their first handgun, do I think that a 1911 is a great choice? Of course I do. I love the guns. I sell the guns, but I live, eat, sleep these pistols. However, for someone who is looking at the handgun as a basic tool where they're not an enthusiast, when they're not saying, I think about guns often, I just want a gun that works. I don't know if the 1911 is a gun for them because I think the 1911 is an enthusiast tool. I like to make the connection to cars because I love cars too. That's my other hobby.
Yeah.
And
I feel like that is always guns.
Oh
and cars.
yeah, guns and cars always go together. And I think it's very much. This analogy is one I like to use, but you have to be careful with it. It's very much kind of the carburetor versus fuel injection. Carburetor takes a lot of work. My car, carbureted points, the whole 9 yards. It takes a little bit of work to understand it. Whereas fuel injection, typically, you jump in the thing, you turn the key, there it goes. The 1911, the difference in that analogy is the 1911 still performs with all the other pistols that are still being made today, whereas of course, carburetors have their downsides in daily use. But, I think it's an enthusiast handgun. You have to know what you're getting into to understand it. And it's taken me years to I don't even think I really fully understand it. I mean, there's things I learn all the time about the pistol. I mean, and I've read the patent documents that led up to that gun. There's about 5 or 6 patent documents that lead up to that gun. I've read through them all, trying to understand the lineage of how the gun has changed over time, because a lot of people don't understand that gun's manual of arms has changed dramatically over the century that it's been around. It has adapted to the shooting styles, whereas a lot of other guns would be left in the dust that were made around the same time as it. So it really is an enthusiast gun. Now, I think that if you are someone who says, I'm really interested in getting into firearms, I'm really interested in making that my hobby, and I'm going to spend time learning about it, the 1911, you can't pick a better gun, okay? But if you're someone who says, I just want a gun to have a gun, and I'm going to invest that much time into it, it's probably not the gun for you.
That makes sense. Kind of like if you need to commute, you want something with good gas mileage.
Right.
Get something basic and simple, but if you really love driving and stuff like that, you're probably not going to want a Honda Civic or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I get a little frustrated when I see people who, and listen, I'm sure people are going to have some ideas about this, but I do get frustrated when I see people who say, I am a gun enthusiast, and they carry or use or, shoot the most boring guns out there. And it's like, when somebody says they're a car enthusiast and they roll up with a Honda Accord, you really believe they're a car enthusiast? No. You know what I mean? When somebody rolls up to me and they say, oh, I'm a gun enthusiast, and I understand that certain people have different goals they want to, achieve with guns and with shooting. But when somebody rolls up to me and they're like, hey, I'm a gun enthusiast, and they've got the most basic, off-the-counter plastic gun, and there's nothing wrong with that. They work. That's great. I kind of go, are you though? They are. But it's one of those things that I really think that a true gun enthusiast is going to have a 1911 and know how to use it.
Gotcha. Cool. So you mentioned a little bit kind of classifying the 9mm as part of the 1911. You were telling us off camera a little bit about, I don't even know if the dynamics is the right word, but the intricacies of trying to make a .45 caliber handgun into a 9mm gun.
Right.
I think it would be really interesting just to talk about, from your experience with your companies and who you're affiliated with is, how have you made that work? What do you think about the 9mm version and kind of moving forward? Basically, what do you think about that caliber and the challenges of trying to make it work?
Well, the 9mm cartridge is 0-2 on the global stage of world wars. So, you have that going for you. It's a small bore, round. And it really, wasn't super popular in America until after the Second World War. As far as working in 1911, you'll actually be surprised. The 9mm and the 1911 go back further than the majority of plastic guns on the shelf. So the first year for 9mm 1911s was in 1949. Colt actually went to military officers came to Colt and they wanted sort of an officer's handgun, something that was a little smaller, lightweight. And Colt kind of cooked up this lightweight Commander. Came out in 1949, and included in the caliber choices were .45, Super 38, and 9mm. So 9mm has been a part of the 1911 history since 1949. Again, that's longer than most of the plastic gun companies out right now have been around. As far as the challenges with going to the cartridge, there are plenty, and that could be its own podcast in itself.
Sure.
But the main issue is the length of the cartridge. Obviously, it's a lot shorter than .45 and Super 38. Super 38 actually works pretty well in a 1911. Of course, it goes back even further to 1929. It works pretty well because it's about the same, length as a .45.
Okay.
So with 9mm, you have to have a spacer in the magazine to kind of get that round, further forward so that it, of course, can feed relatively reliably. We've actually noticed that 9mm 1911s, honestly, they're not as unreliable as you might think.
Okay.
The big issue being that people tend to want to use what I consider weak ammunition. And when you're working with a gun that has a heavy slide like a 1911, and of course is short action breech locked, you definitely have to have some horsepower to be able to unlock the gun, move the gun, the slide all the way to the rear, and then back forward. So when people use quality ammunition that is of a little bit of a little bit of horsepower there, you really don't see any issues. Where I see most of the issues on these is people use really light loads, competition loads, especially when you don't spring the gun for them. And then, of course, they have malfunctions there. But there are some other intricacies, obviously, with that. But we could start going down the rabbit hole pretty
sure.
deep with that.
So would it be like the 115, 124 is what you'd stay away from the most with the 9mm and go for 147?
So I like 124 NATO. If you sat me down and said, hey, pick a 9mm round you got to use for your small bore pistol, I'd say a 124 grain NATO is what I've seen be pretty effective. Of course, those NATO cartridges are designed for use in submachine guns, so they're actually pretty hot in themselves. Okay. So it's a pretty good round. A lot of people like to play with the 9mm because they want no recoil, so they get a 50-ounce handgun, put the lightest load 9mm they can in it, just so they can say, look how flat my gun shoots. But I say grip it, rip it, and have a .45.
What I think is so cool about the platform, right, is that after, like you said, a decade, it's still so relevant, still such high performance. So, what are you guys doing over at Alchemy and Cabot to kind of progress the platform forward, or on the opposite side, keep it more traditional?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've never actually got it. So y'all are really about to see some autistic stuff come out. So the 1911 has, like I mentioned, it has evolved to the shooter's needs over a century. Okay. And even from the original way it was intended to be carried, the gun was intended to be carried with the hammer down, actually, not cocked and locked. Cocked and locked came shortly after. You saw a lot of real gunfighters who, if they were, listen, like for instance, Charlie Askins was a Border Patrol agent early on in the 20s. And, we're talking gunfights every weekend. He learned very early that it was better to keep the gun cocked and locked versus having to draw and cock the gun. But we forget that this gun, the major component in this gun's design was the United States cavalry. And I'm not talking about, air cav. I'm talking horseback cavalry. So it's a really unique pistol in that it's made it this long as far as its development. And part of that is because, of course, it was so popular in the United States. Of course, revolvers were king for the first half of the 20th century. Right. Even with the 1911, Americans really had a hard time giving up six guns, and understandably so. They're pretty awesome as well. But the 1911 changed, and people and custom builders were able to adapt. And part of that came when the rise of what we call combat shooting, IPSC, the early IPSC stuff, starting way back in the early 60s with the Southwest Combat Pistol League. That was sort of the entry point for people being like, okay, I want to run and gun with this gun. Before that, competition shooting with the 1911 and recreational shooting with the 1911 was much like, as I was shooting earlier, one-handed bullseye shooting, target shooting like that. Very stationary, slow fire sort of thing. When the Southwest Combat Pistol League came out, they're running and gunning and shooting the guns in uncomfortable positions and running around with them in their holsters. They had the leather slap days with the big walk and draw holsters, like the cowboy. It looks like a cowboy rig, actually. Yep. I've got one. They're super cool. But the feedback these shooters started giving custom makers started to shape the gun as we see today. You started to see, different modifications for the guns. One big one, and I'm just kind of going to work kind of back to front. Yeah. So like the opening of the mag wells, obviously being a single stack pistol, it's like putting, a rectangle peg in a rectangle hole. It's really tight. So when they were doing their fast reloads, they were getting stuck on that 90-degree corner. So early gunsmiths started swaging the mag wells. They started beveling the mag wells to open up that area to allow you for a faster reload. Another thing people don't think about, especially in the modern era, is what we call the memory bump. So if you look at the little bump on the back of the grip safety, the grip safety has always been sort of the controversial point for the 1911, mainly because early 1911s had a short stub on the top of the grip safety, and the hammer would tear you up. In fact, you can actually tell, it's hard to tell in this light, but I shoot a lot of pre-war guns, and this area of my hand is kind of divoted different than this because the way the hammer just eats into you. So, you saw like custom gunsmiths adding the ring hammer, which came out in 1949 with the lightweight commander, to government model guns to prevent that hammer bite. You also saw the pinning of grip safeties during this time because there was no memory bump, and a lot of people at this time really didn't understand how you had to grip the handgun to get that grip safety all the way. And just naturally, a lot of people's hands don't work well with a grip safety without a memory bump. So they weren't able to push it all the way in. And thus, they would be in these uncomfortable situations, pull the gun out of the holster, wouldn't fire. You actually saw the Texas Rangers early on. There's plenty of pictures of them taking rawhide and tying down their grip safeties. Now, of course, the grip safety was added for cavalry use. It was meant as an automatic safety for if you drop the pistol off a horse, right? And so a lot of these guys who weren't horseback anymore, they were like, well, maybe I don't really need that. So a big thing for the 1911 and its grip safety has been the addition of the memory bump, which came around the late 80s and the 90s, which added material that made it easier for you to fully depress, or at least depress to the release point, the grip safety. And that once that happened, man, people were like, oh man, I can really tune up this grip safety and barely have to depress the grip safety and get it put in. Now we try to stick to a 50-50 kind of what we call let off, right? So you have to get the grip safety about 50% of the way in. That's kind of a liability thing. Okay. But, you know, the grip safety's shape is directly impacted by the competition world of the 70s and 80s. So, you know, Columbia Conference, IPSC, you know, USPSA, all that stuff has shaped that because, of course, you get the larger beaver tail that's upswept so you don't tear up your hand, and you're allowed to get up higher on the pistol. You know, little things like undercuts under the trigger guard. So you can, again, get higher on the pistol. We're trying to get that bore axis as low as possible. The 1911 actually doesn't have like a really high bore axis naturally. It's a great shooting gun because it really is balanced pretty well, and it's got a relatively low bore axis on top of that. But when you cut in like we do an undercut on top of having your upswept grip safety, you can really get high on that gun and it becomes extremely manageable. Of course, the big thing for 1911, twofold: trigger work. People don't realize that this beautiful, crisp, clean, light trigger that we know today, not the case originally. Again, keep in mind, we're talking horseback troopers, and we're talking moving from revolvers to automatics. This is the first automatic the U.S. Army actually, you know, adopted widespread. So you look back at pictures of military guys and things like that back in the day, civilians too, and where do they all have their fingers? On the triggers, every picture, right? And so the guns were spec'd originally with a 6 to 7 pound, you know, trigger pull.
Oh, wow.
Of course, if we rolled out one of these guns with that today, absolutely not. Now, part of that is because your steel is a little bit softer back then, so your sear and your hammer engagement wasn't quite as strong. So you actually had to have pretty long hammer hooks to have a robust, you know, ignition system. Right? Nowadays, we have hardened components in there, so you can reduce the hammer hook length and have a really good trigger, and it still be a robust system in there. The big thing, though, for the 1911, I'll say or above anything else, the sights. So original 1911 sights are not great. And you basically are, and again, I shoot a lot of pre-war guns, you basically are shooting across the top of the slide. I mean, it has sights, but, you know, kind of like a technicality.
Yeah.
You know, they're not great. We call them the hump and bump. So, you know, of course, early guys in Bullseye, they started doing really high sights because you have a lot of options, you know, and they use like revolver front sights, and then you got into using revolver rear sights from K-frames and such. And then, of course, you know, the Bowmar comes out, and now we have really, really nice combat fixed sights, and we have, of course, adjustable sights. But the sights have been one of the biggest improvements to the 1911 and its shootability. And I think really, if you have an old like if you took a bone stock 1911, even if it didn't have a great trigger, you know, even if it didn't have the grip safety, and you kind of knew how to run the gun, all you could do is add sights. I think you'd be all right. But the gun has seen so many modifications, even in how we hold the gun. So like a lot of people back in the day would shoot the gun where they're very similar to a revolver with their thumb down, and they would be under the thumb safety. Because like I said, a lot of times when this gun was first introduced, it was not carried cocked and locked. Again, if you did that on your own accord. It wasn't a widespread thing as it is today. And so there was no, you know, unholstering the gun and then pinning the thumb safety as you unholster the gun, right? As you do today. So a lot of them shot, you know, with their thumb under the thumb safety. Now we have larger thumb safeties to accommodate for the fact you're going to be carrying it cocked and locked. When you draw, you want a nice paddle that you can easily hit and take the safety off. So, you know, and then there's tons, you know, weapon lights, red dots, double stack, of course, came out in the 90s. It's a gun that constantly adapts to its environment and to the shooters that use it. So to me, it's the ultimate combat gun just for that alone, how much it's changed and how it changes for every use that it comes across.
So with having the variety of them that you have, what's like your preferred everyday carry for them?
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you, man. I'm a 1911 just nut. I mean, I don't think I need to explain that. And, you know,
it oozes out.
Right. And Alchemy obviously is the brand that and funny enough, like a lot of people, I have so many people that think oh, just because I work for Alchemy, that's the big reason I'm behind them. Well, yeah, of course. But no, actually, I was a big fan of the brand before. When I worked at a previous job in the gun industry, I actually bought a Quantico high cap, our double stack, for about a year and a half before I started working for the company. I mean, I was a major Alchemy Custom Weaponry fan. And then just that actually is one of the reasons I got the job. It's just because I was a fan of the brand, still am today. So most of the time it's the Alchemy Classic Government. To me, I designed that gun, okay? So, it'd be kind of weird if I didn't want to carry it every day. To me, that's the ultimate pistol. It's got all the modern features that I want. I don't care about red dots and weapon lights. Do I have them? Yes. Do I think they're things you should have? Yes. Do I think you need to carry them every day? No, not really. And so I love carrying a plain Jane 1911. So that Classic Government is meant to emulate about 1918 to about 1923 style government model. It's got the classic roll marks of that period, of course, with Alchemy interchanged where Colt would be changed. And it's got like a beveled mag well, the larger grip safety, the hammer that doesn't tear you up every time you shoot it. It is just a fantastic pistol, of course, finished in our vintage classic because we do live in North Carolina. And that's a great finish that is really, really resistant to corrosion and wear. So that's my favorite gun to carry. I'm not going to lie to you, though. I like putting on an old custom Colt every once in a while. I've got some custom Springfields I like carrying. I mean, every once in a while I'll stick on, I've got a 1918 U.S. property, what we call the Black Army in the business. I'll stick that in a holster, because there's something about carrying these historic guns that really make you feel special. Today, I'm actually carrying one of my most special guns, a Colt government model that was built by actually a gentleman in North Carolina back in the 90s, Dave Pegram. That was Ken Hackathorn's duty gun, and he actually gave that to me. So cool. A few months ago. And so that's a special gun to me. But, at the end of the day, my main carry gun is going to be that Alchemy Classic Government. Again, is it check all the boxes that, the modern kids think you should have to have on a fighting gun? No. But guess what? People have fought with that gun just like that for a century. Mm-hmm. What makes today any different?
Fair enough. I think a comparison for like other things that it's not just necessarily like this looks more intimidating, but you gotta think like a lot of people don't want to pay the money for like a good quality this type of gun.
Sure.
Like it's cheaper to get something different.
Absolutely.
Oh, we'll just go with the cheap option that's simple and easy and looks not necessarily over the top, but if you compare these to other different styles of guns.
Oh, sure.
And the price point. I think that's a huge thing too.
Well, and you bring up a good point.
But these are well worth it.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a lot more complex. A lot more goes into it.
Well, I think that's a great point because I think a lot of people don't understand everything that goes into it.
Yep.
So could you help sort of explain just all that goes into kind of making a semi-custom gun? Costs how much it does.
Yeah, of course. And I do want to quickly say, because I am usually, kind of slapped on with the fact that it almost this elitist syndrome, if you don't have a semi-custom 1911, you don't care. That's not necessarily the case. I think that the plastic guns is those people, as I said before, those people who aren't enthusiasts, the plastic guns really do feel a role. For people who are trying to get in 1911s, I love seeing people go and buy, a T-Sauce or whatever gun they can get, $300-400 and just get into the 1911. See, I'm more concerned with people getting in 1911s than they are even just getting into our guns. I want our guns to be the Lamborghini Countach on the wall back in the 80s. Everybody had a picture of Pam Anderson and a Countach, right? Like I want that to be a goal people to strive to, and if they can't afford it now, that's fine. But on the subject of what goes into these guns, it's blood, sweat, tears, and metal. So all these guns are hand fit. Okay, every part's hand fit. They're oversized parts. Again, American-made steel, carbon steel, by the way. They're all hand fit. It takes about 20-ish hours. Some guns, I always kind of give this, some guns want to go together. Some guns you have to force together.
Sure.
So every gun has its own challenges that kind of come up during it. Certain finishes, of course, will bring on their own challenges. Hard chrome is sort of a difficult finish to work with. It's a very classic, very traditional finish. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the custom 1911 world in the 60s. But it is a difficult finish to work with. Bluing, oh man, that's a fantastic finish to work with. Something messes up, easy to strip, you can blue it again. It's a great finish. But, there's a lot of hand fitting, a lot of hand filing. You have to kind of know things about the gun to get it to fit up right, to get it to work right. People are they're sitting there with hand tools, working with their hands. You know what I mean? And these are American workers working with their hands to give you an heirloom product, okay? To give you something that you're going to pass down to not your children and not your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, their grandchildren. It's something that's going to be passed down in your family. And when people look at these things as just tools, I kind of think, man, as much love, care, and yes, they are tools, but as much love and care and workmanship and experience that went into building this gun for you. Like, this is something that needs to be in your family, for the rest of time until Jesus comes back, So it is something that's a pride thing. We take a lot of pride in what we do. We've got a great customer service department. I'm a little biased on that particular subject, of course, because I deal with it. But we always stand behind our product, because we're 1911 enthusiasts. We understand what you're coming from. If something ain't right, we're going to fix it. And, at the end of the day, we try to build a product and take every little part, every little detail matters. Okay. So, each part of that gun, somebody has to fit. Okay. And so it becomes, a labor of that part, which turns into a labor of the bigger part, which turns into a labor of the whole gun. So it's blood, sweat, tears, and blood, and American steel. So I'm really proud of what we put out. I really am. And even if I didn't work for this company tomorrow, I'd still probably buy Alchemy. I work for the company, and I bought 2 of them used. I've been bebopping in a store. I'd seen Alchemy, start playing with it. Man, I really like it, so I ought to take it home. Yeah. And then the old boy on the counter says, man, I've seen you somewhere. Yeah. Don't you work for these people? Yeah. Well, why don't you just buy one? Well, because I like this one, Yeah. So I bought 2 of them that, just bebopping around.
Yeah, we saw you eyeing that one that we have in the store.
Yeah, you're right. I've done it. And people always kind of look at me like I'm crazy when something like that happens. But, it's funny. One of my clients, they wanted a gun I had, and it was I was kind of going back and forth with him, and he has a bunch of Alchemies. And I said, why don't you trade me for, that Alchemy Prime? And he goes, why? You can have whatever, you can get whatever Alchemy you want. And I'm like, well, I like that one, and that gun's actually up at a shop called Griffin and Howe, being fully engraved and gold inlaid. And that's going to be my new carry gun when it gets back. So
that's what you were talking about.
See, I told you if I was going to get one, it's going to have to be like really extra and shiny and be like, ooh, what's that thing?
Well, I think that's part of owning a 1911, yeah, I get a lot of hate. A lot of people are like, man, I can't believe you're going to carry that gun because it's a Figa master engraver, with, gold inlay and the whole 9 yards. But it's like, man, you get one life on this rock. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You get one shot at this. Why don't you want to have something that's just eye-catching, that's unique, that's cool, that's almost defining of your personality? Like when somebody sees me with a big old gold inlaid and engraved blued pistol with ivory stocks in a carved, milk sparked rig, like, I kind of want to make that statement to them. Yeah. And like I said, it's just like with cars. We talked about my lowrider, off camera. You get one shot at this, man. There ain't no do-over, so you might as well have fun while you do it.
Yeah. Cool. So Eli, if someone wants to, kind of test out an Alchemy, or even get into the 1911 platform, what do you suggest? What are the first steps that they should do to kind of feel it out?
Yeah. So, of course, Blackstone Shooting, it's fantastic. Well, obviously we're here, but it's a fantastic range. And one thing that y'all have that's unique is y'all actually have semi-customs like Alchemies on the rental fleet. And here's the deal is when it comes to a gun of that caliber, if you will, of course, if it comes to a gun like that, you want to get that thing in your hands sometimes before dropping the dinero on it. You know, I mean, it's a lot of money. I get that.
Yeah.
So it's really nice that y'all, not only do y'all usually have guns in stock that you can handle, which I think you have 2 or 3 in stock now, but you actually have one on the rental fleet. So someone can say, hey, you know what? I'm really interested in this. This is a lot of cash to be dropping. Let me go see what this is all about. And, you know, when somebody gets a good 1911 in their hands, they start putting rounds on target, it becomes really hard to get it out of their hands. So I think that's this is awesome that you have one in the rental fleet. So that's a huge advantage to the buyer of a semi-custom 1911.
Sure.
I think definitely after shooting the 45 versus how I'm always shooting 9mm like constantly when I come to the range, and then getting to shoot the 45 and run some mags through it earlier, it's definitely gonna be one of the ones that when somebody comes in, they're like, oh, we just want to shoot something really cool, or oh, we want to learn something new, or we want to get into something, and you know, they don't necessarily have a set budget or a thing in mind they want to start. This is going to be one of my new go-tos for that. It's private instruction. Like, people can come in and do whatever, but this is going to be all right, you don't necessarily know what you want, but I'm going to give you something new that I'm learning on too currently.
Yeah, that's cool.
Because it's so smooth shooting. And even with it being 45, it's flat. Like, it's not an issue to handle.
Well, and it's just, you have to appreciate the history and heritage. I mean, it is the gun in which God wants Americans to carry. You know what I mean? It is our Excalibur. And so, you know, it's just something that I think when an American meets itself with a 1911, you know, a bald eagle's born. It's just one of those unique experiences in nature, you know, and the European mind can't really comprehend what I'm trying to, you know, explain to you. But when you put one of those things in your hand, especially a big old 45, a big bore gun like that, man, it's a life-changing experience. And being able to shoot it first is definitely a huge advantage, of course, because most places don't have a gun like that you could just, you know, go in there and wallop on some 45.
For sure.
I definitely think it's a game changer for people that think it's intimidating just to try it. Taking the little leap to it is going to be a big thing for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Eli, for coming out.
Yeah,
we got Eli with Alchemy Custom Weaponry and Cabot Guns here, talking about 1911s, having a blast. Check us out at blackstone.shooting.com, where you can buy any of them anywhere in the country or in the world for that matter. Or if you're in the Charlotte area, come on down and check them out. And like Eli said, you can shoot one.